1. Return from battle. 300 years later, Madison. I returned with the rest of the unit of royal warriors from our battle by foot. We marched through Mysaulia towards the capital and the palace. The landscape was dull and grim. The brown and gray houses were a kind of a dull sight, and the gray overcast sky created the illusion it would start raining any minute now. But it wouldn't. Ever since the rise of the Great Darkness, it would rarely rain. Months or even years could pass without a storm, which was the only moment when the sky would break open and water would pour out of the sky onto the ground. While we were walking, every citizen stared at us with open mouths and moved out of our way by standing at the side of the cobblestone road. Some were impressed, others were admiring us, and some were even scared of us. We were a very impressive sight, with all of us wearing our black armor made of padded leather mixed with polyester, and all of us covered in the blood of our enemies. And of course, there was me. No one could miss me. I was carrying my weapons, my daggers, my sword, and my bow, all bearing my signature, since they were specially designed for me. But those who might not see my weapons clearly could recognize me by the golden star on my armor. That star indicated I was more than a warrior. I was also a hunter, which was a rare combination. There wasn't much difference between the two. Hunters needed to do diplomatic tasks, but they required stamina and the skill and ability to fight, just like warriors. They could do each other's jobs. Hunters were less needed, and most people chose to be a warrior because they wanted to focus on one career and didn't want to deal with diplomacy. People could also recognize me by my hair, if they didn't see my weapons or the golden star. I always dyed a part of my blonde hair red, making it my signature streak. I'd gotten the idea after my first battle, since there had been blood in my hair. So now I always dyed a piece of my hair bright red to represent that moment. I sometimes heard the words ice and queen through the whispers of the commoners. Obviously, they were talking about me. I was notorious, of course. I was the crown princess and heir to the throne. During my training, I had displayed enough skill and talent to become both a hunter and a warrior after passing both tests. There was also the fact I was leading the division of the Royal Warriors, though I hadn't even reached the age of 19 yet. People called me ice cold, hard as steel, emotionless, and a machine. That was why they called me the Ice Queen. My real name was Madison, but I doubted many people knew me that way. My nickname was more commonly used. Of course, I could feel emotions, but they were mostly bland. I couldn't show too many feelings since I was a princess. During battles, I went into autopilot mode and entirely shut off what was in my heart and mind. As we came closer to the capital, the rumor of our return had spread through the whole population living in the cities we passed through. Reporters had gathered amongst the crowd. They took pictures of us and wrote in their notebooks how we walked and what we looked like. They knew better than to bother us by trying to shove recorders under our noses. The cameras already disturbed me enough. A young reporter jumped right in front of me and quickly snapped a close-up picture of me and the rest of the unit behind me. He immediately went back out of the way, but he still had done something I didn't really appreciate or tolerate. I sighed internally. I didn't like reporters. I understood it was part of my life as a royal, but they shouldn't bother me when I was leading my unit. That way, they also bothered my team, despite reporters not usually caring about warriors returning from battle. The only reason they found this important and wanted to capture the moment was because of me. I raised my left hand, signaling my unit to stop. They immediately obeyed, and I also stood still. The crowd held its breath. It was so quiet, there wasn't a sound to be heard. I sincerely hope that won't ever happen again. It slows us down. We still have some distance to cover, and we should get to the palace by evening, I said. I specifically looked at the young reporter who had jumped in front of me as I spoke. He couldn't be much older than I was. He was a rookie, a newbie, and wanted to impress his boss with the close-up shot. So, I let it pass this time. But in any other case, I would have asked for his arrest to get him taken to the palace to make his plea before me personally, and then before the king and queen. Okay, maybe that was a bit mean and over the top, but on the other hand, he had also deserved it. Nobody was allowed to disturb warriors or hunters on a mission. It was very dangerous to do that, and I had been taunted a lot by the press over the years. The young reporter slightly bowed his head as a sign of respect and understanding. I lowered my raised hand, and my unit and I started marching towards the palace again. The gigantic black gate giving access to the palace grounds had already been raised for us. The guards bowed their heads slightly out of respect and as greeting as we passed by them. We headed towards one of the beige buildings to the left side of the palace. We were going to the house of the royal warriors. Once we entered, my unit and I split up. Everyone went to their own rooms to clean themselves up and to change their clothes. Half of the members of my unit were in almost the same situation as I was. They also belonged to the elite class or were even royal, just like I was. If a person from the elite class or with royal ancestry passed the warrior tests, they were put in the Royal Warriors Division. The elite class made up about 15% of the population in Mysaulia, with the royals at the top. The elite class, the royals included, consisted of people who could control magic. Women who could control magic were called witches, and the men were called warlocks. The other half of the royal warriors were regular humans. Humans made up about 80% of the population in Mysaulia, and they could become part of the Royal Warriors Division by becoming the best warriors in the country. Therefore, the unit I led was the best in the country. The team only lost members when people retired because of old age, or because they needed to take up their royal duties. Not one royal warrior had ever died in battle. Once I had entered my room, I undressed myself and jumped into the shower to quickly clean myself up. After the shower, I put on my regular royal clothing and went down to the meeting room. Lots of other members from my unit had already gathered in the room, and some of them were standing in groups, quietly talking to each other. Maurice, the son of the Duke, was the last one to enter, wearing a white t-shirt and black trousers. His outfit fit well with his dark brown hair. He was about 30 years old and had led this unit before I had taken over about a year ago. Now he was my second in command. He had put me in charge partly because I had a higher rank than he had, but most importantly, because I was a better warrior. Sure, that might sound like I was bragging, but it was the truth. I learned rapidly and had already killed a lot of our enemies living in the Great Darkness. Maurice didn't really have a royal title yet because children born of royal descent usually only got their titles once they took over from their parents. So, for now, he was known as the son of the Duke, but a duke still had a lower rank than a princess. And I was a princess, so only I already had a title. I would become queen once I took over from my dad, the king of Mysaulia. So it was actually funny that people were calling me the Ice Queen. Someday, that would become even truer. I will begin by saying it was a huge honor to fight with you all again, I stated, addressing my unit. They all suddenly shut up and looked at me. I examined them all individually, acknowledging each one of them. I usually started like this after a battle. Fighting in the Royal Warriors Division, making it this far, was considered a huge honor. Everyone fought to deserve their spot in this unit. I always made sure I acknowledged my warriors and their skills. I always made sure they knew I, too, was honored to be part of this unit and to fight alongside them. I really found it an honor, and I was proud I could serve my country like this. I don't expect we'll have to head out again anytime soon, so those of you who don't have their permanent stay on the palace grounds, you can return to your homes. I continued now that I had everyone's attention. Warriors usually had their emotions in check and didn't really show them while on duty, but a few warriors couldn't help sighing. They were relieved and happy. We had had a few back-to-back missions which had forced warriors without royal ancestry to stay on the palace grounds. Only royals had permanent residency on those grounds. The rooms the warriors had in this building were only temporary, for back-to-back missions. In fact, I don't expect you back until next month's meeting, but I do expect you to train regularly. Don't forget you will be thoroughly assessed during that meeting. Thank you for your dedication, I concluded. We usually held a monthly meeting during which everyone got examined to see if someone had injuries or was getting too old or too slow. It was also a way to assess how everyone's training was going. I trusted my warriors to continue with their training in between meetings, but it was necessary to regularly check everyone's physique. I expected them to be ready to head out to battle at a moment's notice. Now that the meeting had ended, the warriors all slightly bowed their heads out of respect and left the room. I stayed until everyone had left, except for Maurice. "Well then, madam, I will escort you to the palace," he announced. He let me leave the room and the building first, but after that, he kept walking right beside me while we headed towards the palace. The guards opened the palace doors for us, and we entered the building. The Palace of Mysaulia was a low but elongated building and was completely white on the outside. The color white was also very prominent on the inside, but there were also other colors present. The curtains were red, the furniture ranged from light to dark brown, and there were many golden decorations on the walls and along the windows. In general, the Mysaulian palace was very light, both inside and outside. "I will leave you now, madam. I assume you will resume your normal training tomorrow? Should you need me, I will be in my quarters," Maurice said. "Probably, yes. I understand why you want to rest tomorrow. Though, we've had multiple back-to-back missions. I think we all deserve some rest." Maurice smiled slightly, making his green eyes light up. "I guess that doesn't count for you. I want to bet you'll do some training tomorrow, even if it's just a little bit." He knew me too well. He'd helped me with my training before I had passed the tests, and I sometimes still practiced with him. I suppressed the urge to smile. I used one of my favorite lines as my answer. "There's no rest for the wicked," I said, while shrugging. He shook his head and laughed. "One day you'll kill yourself by training so hard and so often." I couldn't hide my smile anymore. He had dropped the formalities completely. Before the eye of the public, royals acted rather formally, even towards each other. There was no need or time for formalities during battle, and on the palace grounds, formalities were also not necessary. But even then, people still acted pretty formally towards me. They never stopped calling me madam, not even my warriors while on duty and during battle. Madam was a reference to my royal status, while as the leader of my unit I was a general. When Maurice had been the leader, the members of the Royal Warriors Division had always addressed him as general while on duty, myself included. Because he was my second in command now, the Royal Warriors addressed him as commander, and I addressed him as such as well. I was pretty sure they didn't address him as such just because I did. "No, I won't. You're just jealous I'm better than you are," I replied. "Well, I hadn't expected my own student to catch up on me and to become so good this fast." "You've just trained me too well." That was actually a compliment, and I meant it. I had appreciated his help and his training. I still did. Maurice bowed lightly from his waist. "Thank you, but you give me too much credit, madam. You've mostly trained yourself." I sighed internally. The formalities were back. Well, I enjoyed our conversation, but I should go now. I think you should return to your royal duties as well. I will see you tonight during the celebrations, I said, ending the conversation. Maurice slightly bowed his head. Of course, madam, was his answer before I turned around and went to my room in the palace. Once I was in my room, I took off my dress and put it on the bed. Even though it was a royal dress, it was actually a relatively simple one. It was just plain black and reached to my ankles. I usually wore simple dresses in the palace when I wasn't training. During training sessions, I wore all black, pretty much just like when I was wearing my official armor when I headed out to battle. Normally, I wore trousers and a shirt while exercising, but on hot days I wore shorts and a tank top. I quickly put the latter on now, not because I would go training. I wanted to reapply the red dye in my hair. The color had faded a bit because I had continuously been outside for a couple of days and because of the shower I had taken earlier. After reapplying the red dye, I went to stand in front of the huge mirror in my bathroom. I turned around a bit so a large part of my right side and back was facing the mirror. I pulled my tank top over my head and inspected the tattoo low on my right shoulder. The tattoo was at about the same height as my armpit. It had finally stopped itching, which meant it had completed growing. A couple of witches who were members of the Mysaulian Council had given me my tattoo when I had completed my education and training as Crown Princess and Witch at 13. I'd gotten a snow leopard that was sitting and looking up at the snowflakes surrounding it. It had only started growing after my first battle as Royal Warrior, after I had passed the Warrior and Hunter tests. I'd been 16 at the time. I had killed 3 demon-like creatures created by the Great Darkness. They were the enemies living there and which we fought against during that battle, and suddenly my tattoo had gained 3 snowflakes. The first 3 snowflakes were still in the same place, but I had far more on my shoulder now. I counted them. 26. This meant I had killed 26 demon-like creatures from the Great Darkness. Royal warriors killed, on average, about 60 creatures during their careers as warriors. I had already killed almost 30 creatures, but I wasn't even halfway through my career as a warrior yet. I'd only started less than 3 years ago. A warrior's career began between the age of 16 and 20 when they passed the warrior tests, and usually ended between the age of 45 and 55, unless they died in battle at a younger age. This was a strange concept for my unit. We never suffered deaths, only retirements. But warriors still died in other units. Sometimes they had barely reached adulthood when they died. I was considered a better warrior than Maurice because I had almost killed as many of our enemies as he had. He had passed the warrior test at the age of 18 and had become a royal warrior then. He was now almost 32 years old, and I knew he had killed 36 creatures so far, only 12 more than I had killed. He probably had 20 years left in his career as a warrior before he would become too old or would have to take over as duke, so he probably would end his career with somewhere between 70 to 80 kills. I sighed and turned away from the mirror. I left my bathroom and went straight to my walk-in closet. I put my shorts and tank top away and put on a long, festive dress. It reached all the way to the floor, even covering it a bit. The dress was dark purple around my chest and became lighter further down, coloring flashy red all the way towards the bottom. The dress was very wavy around my chest and at the hem and became a bit wider there, but it wasn't too wide around my waist. I used my magic to orchestrate my tools to do my makeup. I was too lazy to take the time to do it myself. I hoped this would do. I never put on that much. When I wasn't wearing my war paint, that was what I called it, I usually only wore some mascara, foundation, and blush. I only liked the makeup I wore as war paint. The black lines of the war paint around my eyes and over my forehead and cheeks were a very impressive and intimidating sight. When I applied it, I put it all over my eyelids, around them and next to them, creating the illusion that I was wearing a mask. Then I also drew 3 horizontal lines over my forehead and 3 other lines running down both my cheeks. The lines on my cheeks had the appearance of teardrops. I really liked how it looked. It was meant to be scary, and I thought it worked. But right now, I couldn't wear my war paint and needed to dress up. I had a party to attend, one celebrating the victory and return of the royal warriors.